This tutorial will focus on riflessivi, or reflexive verbs in Italian. Now, reflexive verbs, as the name might suggest, are verbs whose action reflects back on the subject. For example, I dress myself, or he washes himself. So they're actions that the subject is doing to themselves. Now, reflexive in the infinitive usually end in si. For example, lavarsi, to wash oneself. Now, you might recognise that lavare or lavarsi, there's still that R ending in there. We've just tacked a si onto the end of it. Now, reflexive verbs in the present tense follow the normal pattern of regular are, ere, and ire verbs, and they're preceded by the reflexive pronouns, which we'll explore on the next slide. Remembering that preceded means those reflexive pronouns come before the verb itself. Now, to construct the verbs, as I was saying, you use the reflexive pronoun followed by the regular conjugated verb, are, ere, or ire, and we'll have a look at that on another slide. The reflexive pronouns, if you haven't come across them before, are small words referring to oneself that are placed before the verb to demonstrate that the action is being done to somebody's self. So, for example, the pronoun mi means myself. Ti, yourself. Si is used for herself or himself. Ci is used for ourselves. Vi is used for yourselves, remembering that in Italian there's two forms of you, the singular and the plural. And then finally, si is again used for themselves, but the distinction between the words will come in the verb. So we'll know who is doing the action based on the ending of the verb itself rather than the si. So here are some examples of reflexives in the present tense in Italian. Let's start off with an are verb, so lavarsi, which means to wash oneself. In order to construct the different forms of lavarsi, we start off by dropping off the entire ending, arsi, and then we add the reflexive pronouns to the beginning of the word or before the word and use the regular present tense endings for are verbs at the end, depending on who's doing the action. So, for example, to say I wash myself, we use the reflexive pronoun mi and we add an o to the end of the stem of lavare, so it becomes mi lavo. For you wash yourself, we use the reflexive pronoun ti, but add an I on the end to show that it's you doing the action. Continuing on, he or she washes himself or herself, si lava, again adding that are ending to show who's doing the action. Ci laviamo, for we wash ourselves. Vi lavate, for all of you wash yourselves. And si lavano, for they wash themselves. So you can see there the difference between where you use the si for he or she, because there's a different ending, and the si for they. Again, the ending of the verb is showing who is doing the action. Let's have a look at perdersi, which comes from an ere verb, perdere, but when we say perdersi, we're talking about to get oneself lost or to become lost. So again, you'll notice that the endings are all the endings for regular ere verbs. So for example, mi perdo, I lose myself. Ti perdi, you lose yourself or you get yourself lost. Si perde, he or she gets lost. Ci perdiamo, we get ourselves lost. Vi perdete, all of you get yourselves lost. And si perdono, they get themselves lost. Finally, an ire verb, vestirsi, comes from the normal verb vestire, to get dressed, but vestirsi means to dress oneself. Again, we would be dropping off the irsi, and we add regular ire verb endings. So we've got mi vesto, I dress myself. Ti vesti, you dress yourself. Si veste, he or she dresses himself or herself. Ci vestiamo, we dress ourselves. Vi vestite, all of you dress yourselves. And si vestono, they dress themselves. So you can see where I've underlined, they're all the regular present tense endings for are, ere, and ire verbs. We've just tacked the reflexive pronoun to the beginning of it to demonstrate that it's an action being done to oneself. To finish off, there are two groups of reflexive verbs. The first one is those that are reflexive in Italian but not in English. So, for example, in Italian, to get angry is reflexive, arrabbiarsi. So to say, I get angry, it would be mi arrabbio. Using that are ending and tacking on the reflexive pronoun. Another example is preoccuparsi, which means to worry. Again, it's not reflexive in English, but it is in Italian. So if I was saying she worries, we would say si preoccupa. With that are ending. Finally, stancarsi, to become tired, not reflexive in English, but in Italian, if I wanted to say they get tired, I would say si stancano, using that regular present tense ending again. The second group of verbs that we can have in the reflexive are verbs that have both the normal and reflexive forms. So, for example, lavare, if you have a look at the photo, lavare can be to wash, but lavarsi is to wash oneself. So I might say lavo I piatti, I wash the plates. And I don't need a reflexive pronoun because I'm not doing it to myself. But if I'm washing myself, I would use the reflexive form lavarsi, and it would be mi lavo. Okay. Another example, preparare. If I was talking about preparing dinner, preparo la cena. But if I was saying I prepare myself to go out, it would be mi preparo per uscire. So you can see there are differences in terms of when we use verbs that are in the normal form and when we use verbs that are in the reflexive form. So that gives you an overview of reflexive verbs. Now really, in order to understand them and explore them a bit further, you need to do some practice. So good luck.